Okay, so I'll start. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. Um, Tonight, what I want to do is tonight. I always say tonight because it's already afternoon by us. But what I want to do today is talk about Yaakov Avinu. And the reason I chose him was a couple of reasons. One of the reasons was because I think his whole talk about. I titled the class "The Prototype of the Wandering Jew" because we're going to see through his whole life he sort of sets the precedent or the tone or whatever, however you want to call it, of him being a prototype of the wandering Jew. So that's one reason I chose him. Another reason I chose him was because he buys, I mentioned in the past couple of classes that there was 3 pieces of land that we outright see purchased in the Tanakh, and he buys the third one. The second, but we spoke about Abraham buying Marat Hachpelah, David buying Goren and Arna Yebusi, and now we're going to talk about Yaakov, when he buys Shem. It's actually, well, when we get there, we'll talk about it in a minute, but it's not this crazy, some crazy story like the other two, but we'll get there anyway, and I just thought it was a nice thing to cover the characters that were connected to the 3 pieces of land that were bought. So that was my thought process in choosing to talk about him today. And I think also, as we'll see, he also, in my opinion, really links the 2 characters we spoke about previously, Abraham and David, because he's sort of this transition between, which we'll get in more detail in a minute, but he's in transition between being chosen to be a forefather of the nation, but also to actually start the nation and lead up to, an actual, not only an individual being chosen, but a nation being chosen and having leadership and community and connection like that. We're going to go into all that tonight. So basically, we meet Yaakov, and I'm not going to go into the whole background of the beginning of his life. I'm going to start really because this is what I want to focus on in this class. Obviously, there's so much talk about Yaakov, but what I want to focus about is the times in his life where he was entering and leaving the land and how that affected his growth, development, and part of being the father of a nation. So the first time he leaves Eretz Israel is also before we're going to also see how Yaakov is really a balance of being an individual in his own right, in his own experiences, his own life, but also being the person that is starting to fulfill through him the Brit Ben HaBetarim, which was given to Abraham about getting the land and and all that. So we'll see how he's really this has so many facets of his character, which is what I think is very interesting, but also I think why he is chosen as a father of a nation, not just someone to have the be. So we have the whole story of Yaakov stealing the brachot from Esav and doing that whole thing. We're not going to go into that. But now after that happens, he has to run away because Esav is going to kill him. He wants to kill him and he's angry at him. So he's sent away to Hadan Aram. Here, I'll share the screen a second. Hold on. So, hold on. And it does that. It doesn't let me see. Yeah. There we go. Oh, no. Sorry. 1 second. Yeah. Okay. The prototypical wandering Jew. So he leaves the land when he's really forced to leave the land. He's running away, and I have 2 columns here. The first column here is I'll make it bigger so you can see. The first column is how Yitzchak, his father, separates from him, and the second column, how God speaks to him when he leaves. So, and we see these 2 visions, one being a conversation, one being a prophecy. These 2 things, well, through a dream, but these 2 things lead him through his journey. So what happens? Yitzchak tells him, I'm going to bless you, and ואל שדי יברך אותך ויפרך וירבך והיית לקהל עמים, right? God should bless you. ויתן לך את ברכת אברהם, לך ולזרעך, אשר לרשתה, אל הארץ, leaving now, right? He sends him, I skipped the pasuk, but he sends him to Padan Aram, to the family of his mother, of Rivka's family, and says, marry someone from her family, the daughters of Laban, which we'll meet in a few minutes. And then he tells him, God's going to be with you. You're going to have the bracha of Abraham. You're going to have children. You're going to return to the land, and this land is going to be yours, even though you're leaving it now. So even though he's at a stressful point and he's leaving, he's forced to leave, he gets promised that he will have the blessing of Abraham, the continuation of children and land, which we keep talking about. And then when he's leaving, when he's on his way out of the land, and he, the famous dream of the ladder, right? He sleeps and he the land you're sleeping on is going to be for your descendants. So your descendants are going to go, you're going to inhabit the land. They're going to be so great. You're going to have so many. And vashivoticha el ha'adama zot, I will bring you back. So this conversation, these two conversations, give Yaakov the strength he needs to be able to leave the land and realize that, yes, I'm leaving my land. This is not what I want to do, right? He's not doing this willingly. He's doing this because he's fearing for his life, because Esau's going to kill him, and also to find a wife, right? Because I didn't bring the psukim. It says, "Lo tikach isha mevnot." His parents don't. Sorry. So he's going to take a woman from the family, okay, like keep it in the family, so to speak. So he then goes to Lavan's house, right? And when he gets there, hold on, actually, I don't want to, how do I stop the screen share? Because we don't need this right now. Whatever. Hold on, yeah, stop share. Okay, so now I'll get back to that in a second, but he gets to Lavan's house, and it's very interesting because he gets there, and his main purpose married Rachel, and then he ends up causing him to marry Leah, right? The whole switch. But he gets married, he has children, he starts building his family like God promised him. And he's working for Lavan, but the work is not a means of itself, like to get prosperity and to build himself up. The work is for the ability to pay off his wives and to have the ability to marry his wives, a dowry, so to speak. And not dowry, I forgot the word, but basically he's proving that he could work for and support the women, and yeah. So now that's how he starts out. Fast forward, right? He has a bunch of kids already, right? He has almost all of his children at this point, and he goes to Lavan and he says, "It's time for me to go home," right? And Vahi kasher yalda Rachel et Yosef. Rachel has Yosef, but it's also interesting to talk about. Leah's barren. She ends up having children before Rachel. Rachel's barren for longer. She finally has Yosef. And when Yaakov has a child with Rachel, he realizes my family's connecting to the land, and he says to Lavan, "Tneh et nashai ve'et yildai asher avadati otam bahen velcha ki ata yadata et avodati asher avadetcha." So he says, "Listen, I paid my dues. I worked all these years to prove that I could support your daughters. I have children. I'm built up here. You see that I'm established. I can take care of them. Let me go back to my land." And Lavan says no. He says, "I saw." Lavan believed in different spirits and different things, and he said, "I saw in the nechashti, like I saw in the divinations and signs, whatever it may be, whatever the avodah zarah they worship." He says that God's going to bless me through you, which does happen. And he works out a deal with him. Let's work out a deal. I'll pay you. And he's Yaakov, whose intentions were pure and family oriented, now he's getting swayed by the materialism. And we see that by living in Lavan's household for so long, he gets swayed by that. And we also see, and before I say we also see, it says that, and he ends up making and speckled sheep, you get and I'll just read those, and we have our own flocks. It ends up being that Yaakov sort of explains the psukim that he sort of realizes how to work genealogy and DNA, and he ends up breeding those sheep specifically, and he ends up building a big flock. Anyway, we also see here that a foreign entity, being a foreign I want to say ruler, but a foreign person is not seeing the value of going to being connected to the land. Give you, and I think that that's something that stands true today for anyone else. Even in Eretz Israel, but even more so out, we get swayed by the comforts and material life that we live. And I don't really want to say that Yaakov's compromising his ideals here, but you definitely see that he's putting it on the back burner a little and saying, okay, I'll work a little more, I'll establish myself a little more. And he ends up needing to be told by God, instead of being asking Lavan to leave, he is now told by God in another dream. By the way, it's interesting, we're going to see throughout the class that Yaakov has a lot of dreams throughout. But he's known as the sort of for that. God has enough, like, you build yourself up here, leave, go back to your land. And by the way, it's similar language that Abraham has, right? So it's a little bit of a reverse lech lecha, how Abraham had to be told to go to this unknown land, and Yaakov had directed to the land and to the Brit. Again, here about B'chalom, he's having this dream, and God tells him in this dream, Anochi ha'el bet el asher משכת שם מצבה אשר נדרת לי שם נדר אתה קום צא מן הארץ הזאת ושוב אל הארץ מולדתך. He says, I'm the God that you made the connection with the ladder when promises him and makes him the Brit. He says, I'm the same God. Rebuild that connection. He's reminding him of that connection and that need to reconnect to the land and to God as one, right? So it's two sides of the same coin here. It's going back to the land so you could reconnect with me, because at this point he's sort of focusing on more material aspects of life and not focusing on the land and things like that. So I think it's a little bit of a message for us of when we have the ability to go, do we go back to Israel by choice, or are we having to be forced by God or some other external factor to go there? And that's just the world out of or the people that were stuck there when it was too late. So Yaakov was sort of on that borderline at that point, because God's telling him go back. And I brought here the language of Brit Ben Hamatarim again, because it shows, right, that Yaakov in the house of Lavan is sort of beginning this Brit. It says, right? So your children are going to be gerim, strangers in a land that's not theirs, and they're going to be worked hard, right? Which Lavan did to Yaakov, right? He made him work an obscene amount of years to marry both daughters. And I'm judge the nation and you'll leave with a big rechush, right? I didn't bring the psukim, but it talks about how Yaakov really established himself immensely and had a huge flock and a huge amount of riches. and he was able to leave B'chush Gadol in a large, in a rich manner. The same way that God tells Yaakov, this is the land that you need to go, that I promised you. So now before we also see, by the way, I've been saying it, but I'll say it out right now, Yaakov is not only dealing with being outside the land individually, he's dealing with it as his contact with a foreign person, foreign ruler. And we're going to see he has three major, four really, the three and fourth major people he deals with, Lavan being one of them. And Lavan, we see, he's an interesting character because we see Lavan is referred to in the Haggadah and also in Mikra Bikurim. And it says, this is about in when you bring on Shavuot the first fruits, you have to talk about our history. And it says, Arami Oved Avi, Vayered Mitzrayim, Vayagod Sham, Teme'at, Vayu Sham, L'goy Gadol, at Sumerav. So it talks about we worked for the Arami, and that being Lavan. And then in Haggadah, it brings up Seuman Mabi Keshavana Arami, Lasole Yaakov Avinu. What did Lavan want to do to Yaakov? Sheparo lo gazar el hazcharim. Paro only killed the boys. Lavan wanted to destroy all of it. What does that mean? Lavan did no physical annihilation. Like, he didn't try to physically harm or kill anyone in Yaakov's family. They were actually his family, right? They were his daughter's kids. But he tried, la'akod et hakol means to uproot it all. And what does he mean? What does it mean by that? Lavan wanted to get Yaakov by assimilation, by swaying him to materialism and the comforts of Aram Naharaim, which we see Yaakov was sort of balancing that temptation. So we have to really think about in our own lives as the prototypical wandering Jew is, how do we relate to a foreign ideology, foreign ideals, and all that, which Yaakov sort of had to balance that. So on the one hand, he had to appease and work with Lavan to get his family started, but on the other hand, he also had to establish his boundaries and connect to that. And then away from Lavan in the middle of the night, Lavan catches up to him. It's a whole story. He ends up getting away. They make a treaty. They end nice, but it wasn't easy. So now he's returning to the land, right? So we said a lot of dreams happen. So as he's returning to the land, now we need to deal with Esav, right? Who's another foreign entity connection that he has. And dealing with Esav, we see two very interesting things. We see the dream he has, the fight he has with the angel, right? Which is, different mefashim say, was it a nevuah? Did it really happen? And he fights the angel, whether it be a real fight or a fight with himself. But what happens here is, you see, hold on, let me make it bigger. Yaakov is about to meet his brother for the first time in many, many years. And it says he's alone, right? He's fighting with this person throughout the night. And he realizes the person fighting with him that he can't win, so he wounds Yaakov, and then he says, and he says, well, give me a bracha, and he ends up, where is it? He changes his name to Israel because he was able to fight with people and angels, and he was able to overcome. So whatever way this story, whether it be literal, figurative, it's really showing that in order to re-enter the land, Yaakov has to go through an internal battle with himself. And I think it's very important, because anyone who made Aliyah or is thinking of making Aliyah, it's a very big internal battle to return to the land, and what that means for me and my life and my family. And Yaakov, I think, is really doing that with this fight with the angel. Brother Esav, right? And this is what happens here is he speaks to Esav, right? And we see he keeps calling Esav Adoni, my master. Ko tamru la Adoni la Esav, Avdecha Yaakov, I'm your servant. Like he bows to him 7 times. I should find favor in the eyes of my master. Right? My master should go before the servant. Right? All this language of master servant, and the commentators are really split here on either critiquing or saying that Yaakov did the right thing. And the 2 basic ideas is that, when dealing with a foreign ruler, you have to appease them, you have to be apologetic, you have to make sure you're not stirring any trouble because it's unstable, right? And we see that Rabbi Yanai, who's with the Romans, says this, and there's other midrash says this was humiliating, and because in the Psukim, if you count, it says 8 times Adoni. So it says we were punished with being ruled by 8 different leaders from Esav's lineage. So there's really these 2 polar views that we shouldn't, how we should view foreign leadership. And I think a lot of it the and what they relationships, and if we should appease them and connect to them, or if we should really, stand our ground and divide from them. But either way, I think it's a lesson of really being conscious of, in the moment, of how it's always a very thin line and tricky way to deal with a foreign leader and stand our ground of who we are, but also protect ourselves. And I think today, again, especially by the way of the conversation with Esav, he tells him, I didn't bring the Psukim, but I'll tell you outside. He tells him, come with me to Seir, to my land. And again, a foreigner not understanding the importance of going to the land. And Yaakov says, no, I'm gonna, I walk slowly, I'll catch up with you, I'm doing my own thing. He sort of nicely divides himself. But again, it's a foreign leader, the same way Lavan, Esav doesn't see the importance of the land. Again, I didn't say this, but again, when he gets the name change and he goes from Yaakov to Israel, it's a reaffirmation of, we also see a name connection of Brit, because when Abraham, right before Abraham's Brit Milah, he's called Avram, and then he's changed to Avraham, right? Avraham Elohim. So the same way here, Yaakov is going from an individual name to Israel, to the name of a nation. The Brit is being reaffirmed as he re-enters the land. And then he gets into the land. He gets in, and the first place he goes is Shechem, and he buys, and this is where I was saying, he buys the land in Shechem. I didn't put the Psukim. Hold on, did I not? Hold on, how did I not put that? Yeah, here, okay. So let me, So Yaakov gets to Shechem, and he goes by Vayavo Yaakov Shalem Yeshchem Asher Be'eretz Canaan Ve'vo B'Tan Aram V'Yachan Et Pnei Ha'ir. He gets into Shechem after being in Pnei Aram. V'Yiken Et Chalkat HaSadeh Asher Natah Sham Ohalo. He buys the plot of land where he built his tent, meaning he established himself. Miyad B'nei Chamor, from B'nei Chamor, V'Yishchem B'Mea Keshita. He buys it for Mea Keshita. V'Yitzav Sham Mizbeach V'Yikra Lo El Elohei Israel, and he makes an mizbeach there. So we see, like last week, we spoke about a lot of similarities of buying Marat Chachpelah and Goren Aram Nabusi. Here we see it was a very simple. We don't get much information. He built his, he established his camp there. He decided to buys the land, and he makes a mizbeach to God. He calls out to God, thanking him basically, and establishing a place in the land. I brought here that later he gives this land to Yosef. Right, I'm going to die and you're going to go back to the land eventually. So he says, I'm giving you the land of Shechem, which I took. Here he says because we'll talk about the story of with my sword. but because we're going to talk about the story of Shimon and Levi in a second. But it's interesting to note that even though there's no real background or real motivation per se for Yaakov to do this, but he knows, I'm entering the land, this land is supposed to be mine, I'm going to buy a place and establish myself here as a member of this land. It's so important to him that when he's returning, to reestablish himself there, or really establish, because he left really before he was anything. Now we have the whole story. While he's living in Shechem, he's sort of, again, we see how we deal with foreign leadership. He's in Shechem, and we have the whole story. And son make this whole side thing that everyone should get brit milah, so they'll be weak, and to kill them, and they end up destroying the city. And Yaakov is not happy with this. Yaakov says here, "Vayomer Yaakov el Shimon ve'el Levi, achartem oti lehavisheni v'yoshvei haaretz v'Kenan u'perazi v'ani metai mispad v'nesfu elai v'yikuni v'nishmati ani u'beti v'imlu hachazoti yaseh et." So they do this whole massacre to Shechem, to the city of Shechem, to get Dinah back. And Yaakov is like, you embarrassed me. You're causing me major issues now with the foreign people. They're all going to come against me. Like, what did you do? How did you think this was okay? And their answer is very emotional. And they say, what, our sister's going to be a zonaz, like a harlot? She's going to, how could we allow that to happen? And we see here the anger of Yaakov is really because they act out of revenge and out of living on the sword. Is something that Esav is characteristic of doing, and Yaakov was chosen because he has the ideals of tzedek and mishpat, of righteousness and justice, like Yitzchak and Abraham did, and he doesn't live by the sword, right? He lives by tzedek and mishpat, righteousness and justice. So when he sees his sons living by the sword instead of righteousness and justice, he gets very angry. And here it's interesting, in this story, he doesn't answer them. When he sees they're so emotional and like, how can this happen to my sister? He doesn't answer, but he saves it. I bought the sword later. He saves it to the end of his life. And it's very interesting what he does tell them at the end of his life. Children, I don't want to be associated with them. Right? Because of their anger, they destroyed a city, and I don't want to be associated with that. I curse their anger. They'll be spread out through Israel. So essentially, they lose their land. They lose nachala. They lose a connection to the land. Because we see, when I'll make this bigger so you can see, when I bought two maps just so you can see different views, but when they do get the land, and each sheva gets a portion of the land, and achala, we see Shimon and Levi do not essentially get achala. You see here, in one map it says Yehuda, that Shimon is meshed with Yehuda's land, and even here in the other map it has a little circle of Shimon engulfed in Yehuda's land. And if you look at the map, there's no Levi. So what happens? Shimon is sort of a forgotten Shevet. He sort of ends up tagging along with Yehuda. And when you learn the Nevi'im and capturing the land, you sort of see that. They can't really establish themselves. They're always on the coattails of Yehuda. And Levi, it's a very interesting, what happens with them is they end up sort of redeeming themselves in Chet HaEgel when they don't do Chet HaEgel, and Moshe blesses them. Not blesses them. He ends up getting... God ends up choosing them as the people who work in the Beit HaMikdash, the Mishkan. And because of that, because they are the teachers and the educators of the nation, they end up getting cities within the Shvatim, because they're teaching and leading the nation that way. So they don't have an achala, but they're engulfed in the nation in a different way, in a more positive way. So that's just the interesting thing to see the difference of Shimon and Levi, of how they deal with this issue. But the main point for here is, because of their actions of acting more like Esav and living by the sword and their anger, they lose the nachala, and they lose that connection to the land because they aren't connecting to because it's a physical connection, but also a mental and a physical and a spiritual connection of being one who goes with tzedek and mishpat. Now we skip forward. We're going to skip a little bit of Yaakov's life, right? I'm talking about going, entering, and leaving the land. So now he's living in the land for many, many years. The years have passed. The whole story of Yosef being sold happens, right? And now we're up to the point where Yaakov finds out after many years of sadness that Yosef is alive. He's leader in Mitzrayim, and he's going down to Yosef. Number one, to see his son, but also number two, which is why he brings his whole family. They all go down, and this is the beginning of Galut Mitzrayim. They all go down because there's a famine in the land, and Yosef says, "Come, stay. I'll establish you in Egypt, so you could survive, and I'll sustain you with the food I have in Egypt." So now he's leaving Eretz Israel, and once again, right? I said again, once again, he has a dream, right? He has a dream again, where God comes to him, right? God comes to him in a dream, and Mareh Halayla is a dream. Vayomer Yaakov, Yaakov, Vayomer Hineni, I'm here. Vayomer Anochi El Elohei Avicha Al Tira Miredet Mitzrayim Ki Lagoy Gadol Asimcha Sham. Don't be afraid to go down to Mitzrayim because I'm going to make you a big nation. Now, why is Yaakov afraid? Because he knows he's at the end of his life, and he knows there's a famine in Eretz Israel. He knows that Mitzrayim is going to be just as luring, if not more luring to his family as Padan Aram was materialistically, because Canaan is suffering now. There's no food to eat, right? They're starving, and Mitzrayim and Egypt is this huge culture, safe haven because of all the warehouses and storehouses of food that Yosef set up. So he knows that it's very unlikely that he's going to be coming back in his lifetime. But God is saying, don't worry, I'm going to make you a big nation there. Sort of validating that it's going to be a long time, but you're going to be a big nation. I'm coming down with you, God says. I will be with you, don't worry. I will bring back. Yosef Yashit Yado al Enecha. And Yosef's going to handle it. And meaning, so God's sort of saying that I know that you're afraid. And he's sort of here not telling him you'll come back, but I will bring your family back. So he's giving that validation, that validation to God, to Yaakov, that I'll be with you. And it's just, I think it's a beautiful thing that every time Yaakov has to leave, God tells him, number one, I'll be with you. Number two, I'll be part of the nation, and the children, you'll have a lot of children, and you'll grow. And that I will bring you back, right? The same way he talks about it in the beginning here about you're going to have a lot of children and I'll bring you back to the land. So here it's not on an individual, I'll bring you back, but it's a national, I'll redeem the nation and bring them back. And when we skip over to, a little while later after he sees Yosef, they live in Mitzrayim, everything like that, Yaakov knows he's going to die. So now what happened? We have to realize that Yosef is the king of Egypt. So when his family comes, not the king, he's the viceroy, but he's one of the main leaders of Egypt. So when his family comes, they're also given a lot of perks and looked at as royalty on some level. They're very important people, right? So Yaakov is sort of looked at as this really royal or important figure, and he gets to the end of his life and he's worried that he's going to be buried in Mitzrayim, and almost they say the Midrash even say that he was worried he was going to be deified and we're going to worship his grave, because the Mitzrayim did have a lot of connection to the worshiping the dead and all that, so he was worried that they were going to do that to him. So when his life is coming to, when he knows that he's nearing the end of his life, he makes Yosef and his sons promise that he will, that they will bring him to be buried in Eretz Israel. And it's very interesting. I have it in 2 blocks here to see what he tells Yosef and what he tells the brothers, right? So the orange part is what he tells Yosef. He says, He's almost getting, towards his death. ויקרא לבנו ליוסף, ויאמר לו, אם נא מצאתי חן בעיניך, שים נא ידך תחת יחי, ועשית עמדי חסד באמת, אל נא תקבלני מצרים. He tells Yosef, put your hand under my thigh, which is one of the symbols of making a shua, a swear, oath. We see Eliezer and Abraham do this also when he goes to find a wife for Yitzchak. So he's basically saying, make this a promise to me, swear to me, Al na tikbereni Mitzrayim. Do not bury me in Mitzrayim. V'shachavti im avotai v'nashati Mitzrayim v'kvartani b'kvuratam v'yomer anochi asek barecha. Please bury me with my fathers. And Yosef says, I will do that. V'yomer yishava li v'yishava lo v'yishchavu Yisrael al rasho amita. And he says, swear to me. And Yosef says, I swear. And he makes this oath to him that he will bury him, that he won't bury him in Mitzrayim. That's really all we hear here. Don't bury me in Mitzrayim, bury my family with my fathers. But then when he talks to the rest of the sons, here he's more specific. He says, I'm going to die soon. I need you to bury me with my fathers in the cave in the Sadeh of Ephron HaChiti. And if you don't know which one, in the Mara and Machpelah, he gives them the geographical, in this area of Canaan. Asher kana Abraham et hasadeh et Ephron HaChiti la'achuzat kever. The one that Abraham bought from Ephron HaChiti. Shama kabru et Abraham ve'et Sarah ishto. Shama kabru et Yitzchak ve'et Rivka ishto. Ve'shama kebarti et Leah. There, Abraham and Sarah and Yitzchak and Rivka and Leah are buried. Like he's being super, super specific, right? Again, we bought it from Benechet. This is our land. And after he does his promise, he dies. He soon after dies. So it's just when you see the two conversations, it's very interesting because you see. When he's talking to Yosef, he's just saying, do not bury me in Mitzrayim, because Yosef is a leader in Mitzrayim, and he knows that he has pull. So if the Mitzrayim want to bury him in Mitzrayim, Yosef, the only important thing Yosef has to deal with is get my father out of Mitzrayim. And Yaakov saying, make sure you do that. And Yosef says, I will. With the brothers, he's making it more of a familial connection, because that's more important to the family and to the nation as opposed to the Egyptians. Again, with Paro, we're going to see in a second also, but a foreign ruler doesn't care and doesn't want to recognize the connection of the Israel to the land, right? There's many people still today that do not want to recognize that we have any connection to this land. It started way, way back when that they didn't want to recognize it and he didn't want to validate it. So when he's talking to Yosef as the connection to the foreign leader, he's just saying, get me out of here. When he's talking to his family, he's saying, this is important land, this is connected land, that we own this land, our forefathers are buried there. He describes it in so many different ways, and he wants to impart the importance of the land to his children. Okay, so, and what's interesting is he has this, when he does die, he has this dual burial and this dual mourning period. He's mourned by the Mitzrayim and the Egyptians, and he's mourned by his own family. And we see that in his death, I think it exemplifies his life, because he was always in two worlds. He was always able to be successful and flourish in the non-Jewish world, but he always stayed true to the land and the brit and the connection with the nation, with Israel and God, and the Brit Avot of his fathers. So in life and in death, he does that. And I think that this is part of the reason is that we see Yaakov's children are all chosen. There's no more 1, right? Abraham is chosen, then Yitzchak is chosen, then Yaakov is chosen. But now Yaakov has 12 sons, and they're all chosen to start the nation, and there's no more 1. Now we just have a nation, right? So he's the father of the nation, literally, right? He's the father of the people of the nation. And there's no more individualized connections. There's a national connection. And I think that Yaakov was able to be the one to do that because he's the turning point of someone who really understands the importance and establishment of the land of Eretz Israel, but also the need when I need to leave the land, it's for a purpose, it's for a goal, and I must return there. The way he left to Lavan to get married and to start his family, and once he did that, he had to return. The same way when he went to Mitzrayim to save his family from the famine, I have to return, right? He had to return in death, and later God has to redeem us, obviously. That's the whole story of Pesach and Mitzrayim. But he realizes that me being out of the land is a temporary, short-term thing that I want to avoid, okay? And I think because of those two things, he really is the model of how we have to balance these two things in a way. And the way he deals with Lavan and with Esav and with Paro and with Shem, and realizing that a very thin line that needs to be walked. The way he realizes the importance of always circling back to the land whenever I can. I get there, I buy land there, I establish myself there, and I think that the main takeaway I want to say from Yaakov's life is that we and especially as Tisha B'Av is coming up, is no matter where we are in the world, in out of Eretz Yisrael, in Eretz Yisrael, nothing is perfect right now, right? We don't have a perfect Mikdash. We don't have a perfect Eretz Yisrael. We have to work on building it. So wherever I may be, in Eretz Yisrael or in Galut, we have to see of how I individually, as part of a nation, could fix those issues and connect to the land again. And so really, I want to take Yaakov's life also as the bridge to Malchut, right? We talked about David a lot, because David also has to learn a lot of these lessons of in and out of the land, which we spoke about last week. So I think he's really the bridge between Abraham as an individual being chosen and a nation being chosen, and ultimately establishing Malchut. And I hope we could do that again in our time. So thank you for coming. I hope you enjoyed. PSA, I am doing a class on Tisha B'Av on Thursday at 11 a.m. New York time, 6 p.m. Israel time. So hope to see you there. There's going to the SCU will be sending out links for all the classes. They're doing an amazing day. There's I think 50 speakers. So tune in, and thank you. Thanks for coming. I hope you enjoyed.